So I'm Joe Morrison. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Concourse. We provide a free online tool designed around the needs of high school counselors to help them find best fit university study options for students. So by original training and interests, I'm a software engineer and computer scientist. That's what I studied in university. That was my first passion. And then I worked on Wall Street for many years building trading systems for large banks. Then I got interested in business and became an entrepreneur. And then for a few years I worked at a company called Grok Global, and we help universities around the world place staff in China and India for student recruitment and partnership development and other things. That was my introduction to international education, which is my new passion. And so with Concourse, I'm kind of bringing together my two interests in technology and education, which is what led to me getting interested in FIT and in the question of rankings in this whole area, which led to us being here at IC3, and we're really delighted to be here. So yeah, I want to thank KIC Univassist for making this happen and for allowing us to be part of it. For the rest of the introductions, I'm going to introduce Jamie Kanki, Lakshmi Iyer, Jamila Abdullah, and Adam Wu. Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Hi, my name is Jamie Kanki. I am the head of student engagement at Concourse Global. My primary role is helping I work with high school students and also with high school counselors to onboard them smoothly onto our platform and make sure that everything is running well for them. My background is actually heavily in international admissions in particular. I previously worked at NYU's Tandon School of Engineering, and I also served as the Associate Director for International Admissions at the University of Bridgeport, and then prior to that, I was at the University of Missouri, Kansas City in international admissions as well.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Lakshmi Iyer. I'm the Executive Director of Education Division at SANM S4. SANM S4 offers in-country advisory and support services for international organizations that want to work in dynamic and challenging markets. My experience in the higher education space spans over 15 years. The capacity in which Joe Morrison kindly invited me to be part of this panel is as a result of my 9 years of work on the student counseling side, where I supported students to go and study in countries like the UK, Australia, US, and so on and so forth. I hope that, this is a topic that none of us can escape, especially those on the counseling side. And I'm really looking forward to the discussions that our slides would hopefully get going in this room. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamila Abdullah, and I'm from the University of Toledo. I work as an international recruitment specialist in the areas of admission, marketing, and immigration, and I've been in my role for about 5 years at the University of Toledo.
Hey all, my name is Adam Wu. I'm the Director of International Admission at the University of Laverne. It's about 30 minutes north of Disney. Always got to throw that in. I found international education through a Google alert. Before working in university admission, I was a studio publicist at Fox Searchlight, and then before that, Paramount Vantage.
Thanks, everyone. So for today, we're going to talk about a few things. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the history of university rankings. We'll talk about the struggle to look beyond, so sort of what this means for students and families and the conversation. We're going to have a panel discussion where we're going to sort of talk about some questions amongst the panel, and then also including audience participation. And that's kind of the format that we have planned for today. But first, a quiz. We thought we'd start with that to set the context and kind of lighten the mood in case anybody's feeling a little sleepy after lunch. Jamie?
Okay, so I know a lot of you flew in from far away to come, so thank you for doing that. And I'm sure a lot of you have kind of hit your jet lag wall just in time for you to probably leave. And then the rest of you just ate a huge lunch, so yeah, we know how that goes. So anyway, we thought we would do kind of a fun quiz to try and get you engaged. So please participate. Those of you on the counseling side know how difficult it is to get your students to respond to you, so please don't do that to me. Okay. All right, so what I have here is a list of 5 schools that have been ranked 1 through 5. Stanford University holding the #1 spot, which I think we're pretty used to seeing. University of Michigan, #2. The University of Georgia, #3. Texas at Austin, UT Texas at Austin, #4. And the University of Wisconsin at Madison, #5. I saw some of you taking pictures. I want you to be careful about how you use those images. So what I want to know is, whose ranking is this? What are we ranking here? Is it A, Best Science Lab Facilities by Princeton Review? Is it B, Best Student Life in America? Is it C, Famous Faculty? Or D, Best National University? So let's see a show of hands. Who thinks it's A, Best Science Lab Facilities? Raise your hand, please. One person. Okay, let's try B, Best Student Life in America. There's a few hands, great. How about C, Famous Faculty? Likely. And D, Best National University? Interesting. Okay, well actually the answer is Best Student Life in America. And I don't know about you, but a lot of us, when we were doing this practice, there was kind of this noise that happened when I made the announcement that it was B, and it was sort of a, which was, kind of interesting. So we're gonna go to the next one. How about #1, Bentley University, #2, Claremont McKenna, #3, Wabash College, #4, Connecticut College, and #5, Rose Holman. So whose ranking do we think this is? Oh, here, Wabash, I got you. You want a bigger picture? Okay, you good. All right. A, Best Colleges for Landing an Internship by Princeton Review. B, Best Return on Investment by Forbes. C, Best Cybersecurity Program by Wired. Or D, Top Biology Labs, Modern Science. Who thinks it's A? B? C? And D? Okay, it is actually Best College for Landing an Internship. And interestingly, a lot of times these surveys require students to respond to an email. I'm not going to discount this ranking, but I do want you to think about how often your students respond to your emails. All right, next ranking. New College of Florida, #1. Naropa University, #2. #3, Western Washington University. #4, Warren Wilson College. And #5, Sarah Lawrence College. Is it Best On-Campus Food? B, Most Haunted Campus? C, Best College for Hippies? Or D, Best Colleges for Commuters? A, anyone think it's A? Best On-Campus Food? B? C? There's a few of you. And D, Best Colleges for Commuters. This is actually the Best College for Hippies. So any of you counselors who have a bunch of hippies in your high school class, now you know where they should go. Interesting fact, Adam Wu, would you like to share a ranking about Laverne University?
We are ranked most haunted in the Southwest.
You see what they did there? You see what they did there? They put him in a region so he can be a top 10.
Yeah.
Clever. All right, and finally, Penn State, Purdue, Auburn, Kansas State, and University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Is this most walkable campus? Most international students by the Department of Homeland Security. Best public school in the Midwest. Or best athletic facilities. Who thinks it's A? Okay, how about B? Most international students. C, best public schools in the Midwest. And D, best athletic facilities? You would be correct. So, interesting. And this is the final question. #1, Brigham Young University, Northern Arizona, Texas again, Northwestern, and UCLA. Is it best quality of life, hottest professor, most profitable sports, best bang for the buck? Who thinks it's A, best quality of life? B, hottest professor? How would you know, guys? Really? Just C, most profitable sports. And D, best bang for the buck. Well, this is actually hottest professor, so well done. And they are both male, and they hold the #1 and #2 spots. So these are real rankings. I just want to point out these are legitimate. If you Google these, you will find these schools listed in this order. So this is kind of a silly exercise. I get it. But what I hope this does is sort of get you thinking a little bit about rankings and what goes into them and how the data is collected for them, what it means, who's collecting it, and how are we measuring these things? How do we measure the hottest professor? So before we dive too far into this conversation, I'm going to let Joe come back up and talk to you a little bit more about the history of rankings.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Just it's possible to be #1 in just about anything if you just fish long enough for the right ranking. So anyway, right, we started thinking about going back to the beginning. Whose idea was this anyway, that you could put a number on a university to kind of indicate its quality? And as it happens, this guy, James McKean Cattell. So he was a psychologist in the late 1800s. And it was at a time when the field was not very mature, so we had a lot of crazy stuff going on. There were phrenologists among his peers who were, trying to figure you out by the shape of your head. A lot of his peers were doing a lot of recreational drugs. Hashish was legal at the time. James Cattell indulged, as well as Freud. Anyway, interesting time. So he got really interested in measuring things about people. So measuring like your ability to remember things, ability to do anything physical or mental. He called them mental tests he was really interested in. And, so as part of all that, he actually had kind of a agenda that was really large, no less than improving the whole human race. That's what he really wanted to do. He was one of the early members of the eugenics movement, so he got really interested in, deciding who should breed with who so that you can maximize the potential of the human gene pool. And he actually offered his children $1,000 each if they would marry university professors, which I thought was amazing, which in today's dollars is like $25,000 a piece. And I guess he wanted them to be really smart, and so you marry a university professor and he would have brilliant grandchildren. So at some point in time, he finally got off this like it's all about nature part, and he decided that nurture was part of it too, and he felt like, with the right education, you could move up and you could increase your skills. And so that's when he started getting interested in, the quality of universities and sending people to the best university. And so he came up with the first ranking. In 1910, he put out a ranking of universities, and it was based on the number of eminent faculty. That was what his first ranking was based on. And so began the arms race. So what's interesting is that, rankings are a great force for accountability and transparency, right? Education is a really important part of the global economy. Students have a lot of choice now. They can go anywhere in the world, and it costs a lot of money. And so there should be some way, students deserve some way to kind of measure the quality of the product they're buying, if you like. And if a university is kind of slipping, it's right that there should be some sort of window into that so that we can sort of see and create some sort of motivation for them to improve. The problem is when rankings become the only conversation, right? When families start talking about nothing else, and then it stops being about the student, and then it starts becoming about this number, and a lot of things get corrupted. You end up in people with ill-fitting program choices. One of the things that happens is that it can be a little bit perverse, where universities start focusing their energies on gaming the rankings, and famously that's started to lead to a backlash. In the 90s, Reed College, many of you probably know, dropped out of the rankings, and they very publicly said they felt like the methodology was flawed. There are many other things. I won't go through this whole list, except I'm really interested in the 1997 event, where 84% of 158 colleges that were that were surveyed, were unfamiliar with the institutions they were supposed to rank. So I want to pause on that for just a minute, because I think it's terrifying, right? These rankings are based on institutions' assessments of other institutions. And not that many people ask, like, who's filling out these surveys? And we don't know if it's a junior person or a senior person, But if they're being filled out, by people and they're being asked, what do you think of, X, Y institution, and they've never heard of the institution and they still judge it, that's going to get baked into the rankings, and then people are going to change their lives based on that number. So anyway, there are many issues around that. So all of this has led to, I think, a healthy discussion around, if we can't talk about rankings, what can we talk about? And I like that there's this conversation happening around fit and what is best fit and what is right fit. So as a practitioner and somebody kind of working in this field now, I actually Googled, the exact words I Googled were, what is a best fit university program? And I was really interested in the question. I kind of meant it philosophically, like, if I were a student, how would I know I was in the right place? And how do you measure that? And what are even the important, do you have to wait till 10 years later after they graduate and ask them as alumni whether it had been a good choice? What I was kind of surprised by was I couldn't find anything like that. Like, if you Google anything around best fit, you find two things. You find a huge number of search engines that all ask you the same questions. Do you want to go to a big school or a small school? Do you want to be a rural or urban? Do you want to be in a cold place or a warm place? I don't think these are questions that students really relate to and that really lead to productive filtering. So you find a bunch of those, and then you find ads for expensive counseling services, myriad ads, and that's all I could find. So I'm kind of left with the conclusion right now that there is such a thing as best fit. It's just kind of hard to say what it is. I think really good counselors have an instinct about it, so you kind of know it when you see it, but it's hard to pin down, which is why we felt like this discussion is going to be a nice thing to have. So I wanted to turn the microphone to Lakshmi for a minute. She's been a counselor for many years and has talked to a lot of students and families, and what kind of conversations she's been having in this regard.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. So when we started discussing about doing this panel discussion, we all went away and started thinking about what we wanted to say. So I only have 3 slides, and all 3 have pictures. So the first one is, as you can see, is a human brain. Through these 3 slides, I'm going to talk about the 3 stakeholders in the process. On one hand, you have the students and the parents. Then you have the institutions, the universities and colleges that are vying for these students. And the third being the counselors. So I think all of us human beings are quite comfortable with simplistic processing of information. We do not want to have complex information given to us because it's not easy to digest. So in one way, rankings make it very easy for us to translate a very complex paradigm for the benefit of the end customer, in this case, a student who is going to be the buyer of your services as an institution. You're faced with a vast array of choices, and how do you make sense? And how do you make sense of it in such a fashion that, like Joe said, that you are in the right place, and that you have made a decision that is going to have a lifelong impact, whether it be in the form of the qualification that you get, the quality of the qualification that you seek, and finally, in terms of the networks that you create for yourself that will hopefully help you monetize a lot of things later on in life. Because let's accept this, many of us benefit from the connections that we make in schools and colleges that we attend. Maybe not at the time of studying, but once we have moved on and we have gotten into new jobs, we find someone else knows somebody, and that is a connection from our school. So that is the first thing that the rankings, make it easier for us to process information and make it palatable to our students and to our parents. So when you have somebody sat in front of you and they ask you, okay, so I want to go for plant biotechnology. I still remember when I used to counsel students for British universities, I would be like, you're looking for biotechnology? Okay, is it animal biotechnology or plant biotechnology? If it is plant biotechnology, you go to East Anglia in the UK. I still remember. So, why? Because it is number 1. Yeah, that is how you try and translate information, because your students and parents probably better receive that information. And it's very hard these days to kind of, reel in enough students and parents' interest by doing in-depth research and giving them back saying, okay, you are a student of this capability, and, it might be easier for you to fit into another institution that might not be East Anglia in this case. The second thing that I wanted to point out is that we cannot discount the fact that international students these days keep many institutions afloat. International students, the income that they bring to the international department keep subjects afloat. We know that many Indian students are responsible for a lot of STEM subjects staying alive within university and college campuses worldwide. So under those circumstances, institutions are left with no choice, including the so-called higher-ranked institutions. We have had a scenario in 2016 when a top-ranked institution was caught with having written to academics worldwide saying that, as you are doing this rating for this particular institutional ranking, make sure that, you keep us in mind. That goes back to the point that Joe made earlier about many of the academics or the peer review happening by individuals who have no idea what they are reviewing. But that forces institutions to really game the rankings. And today we are in a situation where institutions have appointed individuals at director level or above whose mainstay job is to ensure that the institution stays at the top of the ranking scheme. So, institutions have been forced to invest in this whole ranking framework, keeping it alive, because funding is dependent on it. The number of international students that they attract is very much dependent on that, because it is a herd out there, and it's very different. It's very hard to be different and then defend why you are different. So it's easier to be part of that whole game. Then that takes me to, the next point. I thought this is quite interesting because we are now, every day we read articles about automation and artificial intelligence and, and so on and so forth. So the students that we are interviewing and the career choices that they are going to make are going to be quite different. Not even within our lifetime, but within the next 5 to 7 years, we are going to see jobs that we currently don't even know exist in the future. So under those circumstances, the mantle of responsibility on a counselor, because that is the third angle that I want to talk about, the mantle of responsibility on a counselor is very, very heavy. We are dealing with futures here. We are dealing with life savings. In the case of many Indian parents, it would be probably, their entire provident fund that they are probably withdrawing and sending their child abroad to study, with the hope that it is going to change their future. So the kind of scenarios that we as counselors come across are fourfold, in my opinion.
We're running low on time, so maybe.
Yeah. So the number one being, the influence of friends and peer group. So even if you want to send a student to a best fit institution, they might not take that advice. They would rather go to a place that their friends and their family have said is great. So, it's a lost cause. You are not going to kind of get through and win that battle. The second scenario being, the parents being overly ambitious for their children and not wanting to look at what is suitable for the child, but rather what is suitable and good in their eyes. So that angle, as a counselor, you have to really kind of overcome. The third scenario is the financial need and the requirements of a student who is sat in front of you. And the fourth being Gen Z. So, it's not even like, Gen Y, we are dealing with Gen Z that's going through a shared economy world and are highly individualistic. So how do you kind of, counsel them in such a fashion that, they end up, probably they are going to be the generation who will be very happy in being in a place that is fit for them and not fit for their parents or their family, and so on and so forth. It's all about their individualism. So these are the four things as counselors, when we are sat in front of a student and a family, we have to bear in mind. On that note, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Yeah, very, very good points on the counselor side. Maybe we can spend a couple of minutes on the university side. For example, all of you have worked with students and families in different contexts. Maybe a question for Jamila or Adam. How do you respond when families come up to you and open the conversation with a question of your rank?
All right, so this is probably a question that Adam and I get on a daily basis as we're recruiting, and probably have heard it multiple times in the last couple of days. But the way I like to approach this is by having a more positive, meaningful conversation with the student or parent. So instead of answering the question right away about whether or not we're ranked, I like to ask them first if they would like to tell me a little bit about what they're looking for in a university. Do they want a public school or a private school? Is student life important to them? What academic program are they looking for? Once you start to ask these types of questions to someone, they'll start to speak to you more about fit and less about ranking. But it also allows me as a university representative tell people aspects of my school that aren't necessarily found in a ranking.
Adam, what about you?
Sure. So, smile. But after that, I usually try to pose the question either something along the lines of, what's important to you? Or I'll flip it around and ask them, okay, obviously you're a good student. Do you have a favorite class in school? And usually they'll have an answer. And then ask them, well, why is that your favorite class? And they'll either say something like, I like the teacher, or, because I'm really interested in the subject. So if it's something like, I like the teacher, I go, well, how does that teacher engage you? Is it because it's interactive? Are you looking for a school that follows the patterns of that teacher? Or if they say it's because I'm really interested in that subject, I'm like, oh, okay, so are you looking to study this subject more in depth? And then just kind of based on their self-reported answering what's really relevant to them, having nothing to do with the ranking, I'll have an honest conversation with them and say either if our university can maybe meet those needs, or if we can't meet those needs.
Right. I think that's really interesting, because I think if you cannot trade on rank, if you can't have that conversation, it kind of forces you into having this diagnostic conversation where you get to know the student and you elicit their interests, which seems to me like a conversation that always should be had in any case. What do you guys think? What do you think are important characteristics or aspects of university that are not captured by rankings?
Sure. Well, I guess I should say we are technically ranked, but see, even though it's not important, I still have to say that, right? So it's funny how that comes up. But I'll also get a lot of questions about what's your student to faculty ratio, and then I can tell them what it is, but I say, but more importantly, I always suggest to students, I tell them I went to a school where the student to faculty ratio was 8-1, but my intro to chemistry class had 600 students in it. So even though there's this amazing student to faculty ratio, my freshman year was nothing like that. So I tell students sometimes that's a legitimate question to be concerned about, but maybe when you're going through this process, I would suggest asking other universities, in my first year, what's my biggest class, or what's my class size going to be like? So I ask students there is some legitimacy with certain types of ratings and ratios, but ask them to kind of dig a little deeper into how they're asking that question to get a response that's better suited to what is important to them or how they best learn.
Thank you. Actually, this leads me to a question. Maybe I put this one out to the audience. On the university side, can anybody hazard, tell me some characteristic of your university that you think is important that is not captured in any rank? Are there any things that you think are awesome about your institutions? Yes?
Like faculty research topics. I think a lot of students, a big part of your university experience is who's going to teach you, the professor. So if you have some random university you never heard of, isn't even ranked in your top whatever, but their professor is doing a very specific research on something that you're interested in, I'd say that's worth anything. That's great.
Right, yeah, quality of teaching in a particular subject area, it's too specific to get a ranking, right. And that could be the proper basis for a decision. Anybody else? Other institutions?
Access to academics when you need them outside the class. If something is really minimizing your that you actually get to the university.
Right.
Student satisfaction. But student satisfaction is measured overall, but not sure to measure in terms of service. So if you're not in these schools actually struggle. So I think that's the thing that I think as well.
That's really interesting, right? Access to academics. And I think one of you mentioned that too, right, Jamila?
Another one would be student satisfaction with the university overall. Before I came to India, I actually asked one of my students from here, why did you choose the University of Toledo given that we're not, a top 100 school? And his answer to me was actually that we went above and beyond to answer all of his questions in a timely manner during the admissions process. Our international staff did an excellent job at welcoming him to Toledo. Being far from home, that was like one of his major concerns for both him and his family. And then also, we were able to secure him with an internship in his engineering program. So some of these qualities actually came after he was a student at our university, and these are things that he would have not known beforehand if he hadn't selected us.
Right. What's interesting about that, not only does it seem to me to be a perfectly reasonable basis for choosing an institution, access to faculty, if there were a ranking for that, you could imagine what universities would then start doing, saying, how many texts do you respond to per day or something, and then measuring all the faculty. It could get really weird. Let's see. Any other comments on this particular front? Maybe on the counseling side, things that you feel are important elements of the decision around how a student should choose a program that are not rank-based. Yes?
So I'm a counselor at a school in Bangalore, but I'm talking about my experience. So I studied in Canada. I went as an international student. And I went.
Where did you study?
I did international relations and economics. So I went to a really small liberal arts school, and one of the reasons I picked it is, so I found out about universities looking at rankings and all of that, but the reason I chose that university to go to is, when I used to email them and ask them questions, I would get responses really fast. They were very good at getting back to me. Every single letter that they wrote to me had a little tag notes at the bottom. So it felt so personalized that I felt that when I go there, I'm not going to be sort of lost in the crowd or just a number among a lot of students. That really attracted me. So that's something I try to tell my students, but they're very hung up on rankings. It's hard
Right.
to get that.
And if that's what you value, it's hard to know where else could they get that too. What are the top 100 schools for personal service or something?
I think a lot of us on the university side underutilize alumni from particular regions, and this is something that has really, really worked well for us in terms of getting students together, not just having a yield meeting, not just sitting down with the mom and the dad and having a cup of coffee, but bringing a successful alumni or alumnus from their own country, or maybe even their own city, has really, really made, it puts the picture of success in the mind of the parent. And for a university like mine, where I'm not necessarily the first name that comes up on people's list, if they see that somebody went there in the early 90s and came out and is now a very successful architect or builder or something like that, that's really good, right? And I'm not sure even we are utilizing our alumni the way that we could be, but slowly getting there.
Right. So we're getting a good list here. We have engaged alumni, we have quality of faculty and research in specific areas, and we have responsiveness of the institution. More comments? Yes?
So I represent a university, and one thing that I do encounter a lot when I talk to students is that which ranking to follow, because some rankings have different parameters of judging. I'll give you an example. In the UK, we follow the QS system, which takes into account the research as well, whereas the Guardian does not. So the ranking of the university would be very different in both the tables, so that increases as well.
Right. Yeah, so students and counselors should consider, if you're going to pay attention to a ranking, how is that ranking composed, and does it reflect things the student cares about? Maybe one more comment on this one, and then I've got another question I want to ask everyone, but okay. How do you want to?
So, because my cousin or students were already impacted by the state of feedback, they gave answers about their student life. Isn't really captured onto on websites. So every university has the best clubs and everything that the student engage in. So I have a student who went to a university and wants to transfer out. So it was everything that she wanted. Wants to transfer out just because she found the place too liberal for her liking. So she just could not adjust to that social aspect of the college. academics are great, professors are fine, but she feels that she cannot just socially because it's too liberal for her liking. So,
Which there's not a ranking for, I don't think.
exactly,
You're right.
there's no ranking for that. Another student who I worked with also told me that he could not really take a course with a particular professor because his registration would have been the 20th. And the university would fine the professor for having more than 20 students.
Oh, that's
And that
terrible.
affected them.
Right. So I'm going to ask the opposite question, which is, what are sort of elements of the study decision which are captured by rank, which we shouldn't throw away if we're going to keep the ranking system? Maybe back to our panel. Does anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I think sometimes I can see there are certain elements of ranking that sometimes can be helpful, like the internship thing, I think is very important, things like that, or there are some rankings in terms of that look at given, the anticipated graduation rate. So like they look at the demographics of the entering freshman class and they predict based on the socioeconomic and all these other parameters what they expect the graduating numbers to be. And then they've looked at schools and see what universities exceed those targets, things like that. But I think more it has to do with quality of life. Things like with internships, the ability to get involved, happens with the professor. Because I think it's funny when I talk with my students, they realize there are some things that matter, but they didn't realize those things mattered until they got to campus, right? So something really trivial. My university, there are anyone familiar with Target in the US, right? That big chain store that sells everything. You go in for toothpaste and you come out spending $100, right? So there are 2 Targets within 5 minutes from our campus, right? And so a lot of our students said, it is so convenient. I didn't realize how important this was to me until I got here and realized I always need something. So it's something very trivial and very, I would argue, kind of silly, but it's something that has been very helpful as part of their college experience.
Right. I got one of my own. I have a friend of mine who's a Yale graduate, and his favorite memory of university and like a big selling point for him was the choir. It was like they have a really wonderful musical tradition, and the choir get together. They have alumni get-togethers and they're lifelong friends and so on. I've never seen a ranking for that. Another, Lakshmi?
It's a flippant comment, but I think for Indian students, it's very important to know that there are grocery shops where they can get Indian ingredients. It is a serious issue for a lot of students. I used to get asked that question always, will I be able to eat Indian food? Or do I have to cook, because most of them haven't even lifted a pan when they leave, or have made tea before they leave the country. But it's a very important aspect. I even thought at times that, you should rate all the universities that you promote based on, okay, this one has got an Indian restaurant in the vicinity and so on and so forth. But I think it's a very important aspect. It goes back to the comment that you made of convenience.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, kind of expanding on this theme of what do we think is the place of ranking in the question of best fit? Say maybe coming back to the counseling perspective, maybe I'll turn it back to the audience for a minute. What do you think is the proper place of ranking when you're thinking about best fit for a particular student? Yes?
So, from my experience, I think it's very important to educate your student and parents as well about how to use rankings and what they can tell you. So a lot of them sometimes come with this, they treat it as an absolute, so this is number 1 and this is number 2. That's not the way it works. So rankings obviously do tell you something, but it's not the whole story. So you can use it as part of your decision making, but there are several factors and layers that you need to kind of, also look at in order to come to the right decision of what is the best fit for you. So, it's a very nuanced, you need to really have these conversations both with students and parents. But I think it's very important to answer those. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting that I listened to a program once around the definition of what the correct temperature is for the human body. Most people say it's like 37 degrees Celsius. but actually for most people there's kind of a range. Sometimes it should be a little higher, sometimes it should be a little lower. And it seems like the proper place for taking your temperature is like, if it's 40, there's something wrong. And then you like look elsewhere. But you don't start saying, you know, the temperature is like the only number that matters and wearing it on your shirt sleeve or whatever. Anyway, other comments? Jamie?
So I just want to say, I went to a session this morning for the California schools. Shout out to them because that was an early session. But they talked, interestingly, one of the big words they talked about was context. And for you as counselors, it's really important to you that universities look at your students' applications in context, not just looking at their grades, right? You want them to see the whole picture. And that's something that your students' grades will just not encompass the entire student. Likewise, a ranking would not give you the whole picture of the university, right? So if you're going to use rankings, if your parents or your school is going to insist upon it, I think that there's a responsibility, and it's a shared responsibility for all of us in higher ed. It's a shared responsibility for the counselor to educate the parents about what this ranking means. If your student wants to be an entrepreneur and start their own business, but this school is ranked really high because all of their students get into top 10 corporations, that doesn't mean anything for your student. That means nothing. And sometimes they don't even clearly say that. They're just like, this is ranked number 10 for business. So you're like, this is a great place for my student, but actually it's not. So I think that the education coming from the counselor, and we get it, we know it's difficult, and it's university's responsibility as well to recruit responsibly. And when a parent asks you, what is your ranking, not to flip the question and be like, well, we're ranked this and this, but this and this, and we're not really, you know, have the conversation, have the full-on conversation and explain in depth what the full picture of your university is. We had a great conversation yesterday talking about how schools that can't answer that question in one word with one number have a much more meaningful conversation with students than just spitting out facts about, you know, they don't get to know the students. So encouraging a full conversation is, I think, really important.
I have one comment to add. Much as, you know, having that meaningful conversation is very important from the context of a school trying to kind of recruit students from India. Many of these education fairs that we see, they are, you know, mass recruitment fests. And where do you get the time to have that, you know, that nuanced and multi-layered and meaningful conversations? Because those one-on-one interactions are so important in making sure that the right decisions are made. But I find that in the context, again, goes back to my brain picture. You know, it's very easy in a very busy fair to just say, okay, we are number one for this, and, you know, move on. You know,
right.
That kind of conversation. Because in India, that I think is a challenge.
So I have other questions I want to explore, but before I leave this one, I want to hear some more comments from the audience around places where rankings do have value. You know, can you think of examples where a ranking was a worthwhile part of a healthy conversation around where a student should go? Yes?
So I'm wondering if there's any information that grabs how inclusive the process of admission is. So we hear about admission requirements and the exclusivity in the entire process. So there is a definite benchmark for these universities to accept. And then I still feel it would be worth the while to understand whether there is inclusivity in trying to understand the various capabilities of the child that's seeking admissions. Is there a way to grab this information?
Exclusivity as a inclusivity. I don't know. Anybody on the panel, do you have any idea how to answer that?
In the context of the US schools, a lot of them that offer Pell Grants, where they go after a certain demographic within the student population. That could be one, because they also track how many of those students actually graduate out of that class, because they really do not have the same level of opportunities that, you know, the other students from more privileged backgrounds come on to. But having said that, you know, in India we celebrate selection by exclusion, don't we? Because that is what, you know, the IITs and IIMs, in my honest opinion, stand for. the other way of probably looking at that is, from an international perspective, are you sending your student to a school where there is no tradition of internationalization, or how many countries are represented on campus? Because then, the inclusivity or inclusiveness happens as a result of, as a force of nature, because you have so many different people from different walks of life on campus that you have no choice but to be inclusive. Yeah, so I think there are different ways of looking at that, either in terms of an income level that the university attracts, or by way of how internationalized they are on campus. That is, I think that is that. I don't know if I have answered that. Yeah.
Just took two different examples there. So I get the point.
Other comments?
Just to add for the UK, there's something called the Access Agenda, and so many universities will be able to explain how they are bringing in students from a variety of non-traditional backgrounds. So that's something you can ask each institution, and they'll be able to give you data on that. It's called the Access Agenda.
Thank you. Yes.
What happens is when we are asked about rankings, obviously we all sort of cherry pick, and I will say, oh, we're a top ranked research university, or someone else will say something. But you sometimes feel a little guilty about that, because you also know, like you said in the beginning, the way rankings are done. Now, when I say that our College of Business is 100% placement or something, I know that the response is based on those who have responded. So those who have responded, it will be 100%, but that's the way it will come out. So I think the title "Tyranny of Rankings" is just so apt, and I don't know how we get around that.
Nailed it. You nailed it.
Right. I noticed, like, I've been focusing my line of questioning on trying to get people to say nice things about rankings, even for a little while. It's not easy on the back.
I mean, I think it is laziness, right? We don't want to dig deep into these conversations in a lot of instances. I really appreciate Jamie's comment about taking the time to have the conversation with parents. And then when they do ask about your ranking, ask them, do you have any idea what the criteria of who was this ranked by? I mean, there's, 120 some odd ranking systems out there, and that's just for who knows what. I mean, we're putting everything in numbers when in reality, what is the criteria of the system? And when you ask those questions, they get to start thinking about it. They become a little bit less lazy about their own research process too, right? I mean,
Maybe we should refuse to answer the question until they answer a few questions about. Let's see, we have a few questions next to there. There we go.
In my own research, looking for master's programs and other things that are become more and more specific, it's sometimes okay to start there to see, because there's not a lot of programs out there on robotics or mechatronics at a certain degree level. So using the rankings to find very specific programs, not necessarily general rankings, might be a good spot to start, because there's just not a lot of, sometimes there's not a lot of places that have those programs, and it's a nice place to start to find out what universities are actually doing research in those specific areas. So I think if you're going to use rankings, dig deep, don't do just the regular stuff. Dig deep,
like that
as deep as possible.
Don't ask the rankings question until you've narrowed the field a little bit, and then maybe you can use it to choose a finalist.
Right.
Question over here, or comment?
Yeah, so I was just going to, I totally agree, and I think the students need to remember that it's in their best interest for you to really scrutinise these rankings. The same way, if you're going to buy a car or a property, and you just listen to one stream of information, you're the one who's going to be shortchanged in the end if it's not accurate. So I think you take these rankings in the context of how they're actually being used. I think other things like first year retention rate is another strong indicator. How many people went there under pretense that the university was what it was, and how many people actually leave in the first year. Equally, I think student satisfaction ratings are also extremely important. In the UK context, the National Student Survey is a very robust survey ranking satisfaction, whether you're a large research institution think if students are taking all that information together, they're the ones who are going to benefit in the long run, rather than some lazy approach to say, okay, I heard that person said it's number one, I'll go there, they have a miserable time, and then perhaps have to switch out from that institution.
Right.
Princeton
That's a
Review.
great point.
Princeton Review just finished a
That's
6-year.
your point. Teaching excellence framework, what they've done, I really like them. So what they've done is this is putting numbers of those institutions, what they've bracket that
Right.
So when you put universities in that bracket, you sort of give the onus to the student. From within the goal, you search the best one. I think
That's a very interesting framework. You know, it seems challenging maybe that funding is going to be tied to it. That's a lot of power for one framework, but maybe I thought we only have a few minutes left, and there's one question I really want to ask, which is that if, say, on the university side, and maybe I'll ask the panelists and a couple from the audience, what are the questions that you wish parents and the students would ask if they're not going to ask about rankings, but you had to have one or two really solid questions that would help qualify the institution? Jamila?
I would like if they asked more about the outcomes of our programs. So what exactly are we going to teach a student when they're in our classes? And also, what kind of opportunities do we provide to students after they graduate? Because I think it's important that they are aware of what is going to come out of investing in such a large and expensive education.
One of the main ones I always like to talk about is how is the university going to help me succeed as a student once I'm there, and what opportunities will the university be able to provide me outside the classroom to meet the career goals or professional goals that I have.
Those are good. From the audience, ideas? Yes.
So I just wanted to add, I usually suggest most of my students to go to the website of the university because all this information is there on the website. You'll be surprised to know that students who have applied to us haven't really gone through the pages of the course. If I ask them a particular question, have you gone through this research in your department? Or these are the subjects that you will study in detail, like for example computer science, someone's interested in data analytics or data science, and they're really not sure whether they should take the MS Analytics program or the MS Computer Science with the data science. But all this information is there on the website. So this is one thing that you could that I would like all of them to take back. Rankings, like the panel said, is easily digestible. It's very easy to say top 50 computer science programs in the United States. But there's so much to that particular course because the computer science program at X university is not the same as the computer science program in Y university. It is very different. And rankings really do not capture that.
That's a very good point. Yes?
It's just a generic statement that I'm making. And my son was studying in the top 4 ranked universities in the world. In one of them, of course, being in UK, that's where he was studying. But he was told by his professors to move to US in a college which was not ranked so well because there was more stipend.
Because
so
what?
There was more stipend over there. So there are things. Then, in spite of getting into Ivy colleges, he chose this particular college because the professor who was there was a top professor who wrote a lot of books on econometrics. So it is not only about the ranking, there are things like stipends, there are things like what kind of books, whether they are also getting Nobel Prizes. These are also very instrumental in you choosing the college or the university. Just wanted to generally add that.
Thank you. That's a good point. We're just about at the end of our time here. And so now, notwithstanding today's subject matter, we need to be ranked. We need to know if we've done well or poorly. So yeah, please fill out the card and let us know how we did. And if you have any questions about Concourse, our company, please feel to grab one of our postcards or come chat with us afterward. Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.